Desperate for help, they got firepower, the best HFY sci-fi stories. It was a quiet evening on the outer rim of the galaxy, where civilization barely brushed the edge of the unknown. The small mining colony on the planet Galterra 4 had been struggling for years, their resources dwindling, their numbers shrinking. The colony's leadership had sent out countless distress signals to the Galactic Council, each one more desperate than the last. They begged for help, for food, for medical supplies, for protection, but their cries fell on deaf ears. The Galterans were an industrious people, surviving against all odds on a hostile planet, but they were no match for the endless waves of raiders that terrorized their settlements. With each attack, more were taken, more were lost. They had run out of options, and soon they would run out of time. Then, the unexpected happened. A transmission arrived, cutting through the static of their dying communications network. It wasn't from the Council. It wasn't from any of their allies. The message came from a ship that had no business being there, no business at all. To the people of Galterra 4, the voice on the other end boomed, deep and unmistakably human. We heard your distress call. You wanted help. You'll get help. And when we arrive, we'll bring firepower. You're not alone anymore. The Galterans were confused, skeptical, and more than a little afraid. They had seen far too many saviors who promised them safety only to turn their backs once their demands were met. But there was something in the voice on that transmission, something firm, something unwavering. It was a promise that was different from all the others. It wasn't long before they saw it. A massive ship appeared on the horizon, unlike anything the Galterans had ever seen. It wasn't a military vessel, though it bore the marks of decades of battle. The ship was sleek, nearly unmarked, and yet it carried an undeniable presence. As it descended, a heavy chill ran through the colony. This was no ordinary force. This was something different. The ship touched down on the barren soil with a rumble that shook the ground, and out from its bay emerged a group of soldiers. They were human, unmistakably so, but they weren't dressed like the soldiers the Galterans had read about in the history books. No, these soldiers wore armor unlike anything seen before. It was sleek and reinforced, designed for combat in environments even more hostile than Galterra 4. And they were armed. The humans moved swiftly, with a purpose. They didn't talk much, every action they took spoke volumes. They set up defensive perimeters, deployed advanced tech in the blink of an eye, and laid waste to any raider who dared to approach. Within hours, the colony that had once been on the brink of collapse was secure. The enemy was routed, and the Galterans' desperate cries had been answered with brutal efficiency. Days passed, and the humans did not leave. They stayed, offering their assistance, providing what the colony needed. They rebuilt the communication towers, sent out signals to warn the Council, and offered the Galterans the best technology humanity had to offer. And when the colony leadership asked why they did it, the answer was simple. We don't leave people behind, ever. As the Galterans began to rebuild, they realized something that had never occurred to them before. Humanity wasn't just a powerful force in the galaxy, they were a relentless force. They didn't negotiate with threats. They didn't cower before danger. When humanity decided to intervene, they did so with the full weight of their resolve. The Galterans began to see them not as a distant ally or an advanced species to be feared, but as the kind of force they could rely on, one that would never abandon them, no matter the odds. But even as the colony returned to normal, the human soldiers didn't leave. They stayed, keeping watch over the planet. They didn't need to say anything more. Their presence was enough. The message they sent was clear. When humanity says it will help, it doesn't just offer assistance, it offers the might, the will, and the firepower to do whatever is necessary. And the galaxy was beginning to take notice. Desperate for help, they got firepower, the best HFY sci-fi stories, continued. Word of the human intervention on Galterra 4 spread like wildfire across the galaxy. It wasn't long before the stories began to circulate. Not just among the diplomats and traders who frequented the Galactic Council's corridors, but among the pirates, raiders, and warlords who had made a living preying on the weak. They laughed it off at first. A single ship, a handful of soldiers? What could they possibly do against the vast, sprawling criminal empires that ruled the Outer Rim? They found out soon enough. Weeks after the humans had left Galterra 4, the same raiders who had once terrorized the colony came to the border worlds of Koltanis. These marauders were known for their brutality, cutting down entire settlements in the blink of an eye and leaving nothing but ashes behind. Their reputation was built on fear, and fear alone. But when they arrived at Kultanis, they were met by something entirely unexpected. The humans. Not just a handful this time, but a fully equipped fleet. The same sleek, powerful ships that had saved Galterra for now filled the skies over Kultanis. Their weapons systems primed and ready. The raiders had heard the rumors, but they never believed them. They thought they were invincible. That was until the first shots rang out. The humans didn't give the marauders the chance to strike first. They were surgical in their approach, eliminating any threat before it could escalate. In the span of an hour, the raiders found themselves outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outgunned. The humans weren't just fighting to defend. They were fighting with purpose, with precision, with relentless determination. Every move, every strike, was calculated to break the will of their enemies. The marauders' ships didn't stand a chance against the human technology. Their attempts at retaliation were futile. The humans didn't simply destroy. They sent a message. They incapacitated, captured, and dismantled their enemies, forcing them to face their own failure, to see the power of those they had once underestimated. By the time the last raider ship was disabled, the message was clear. Humanity wasn't just a threat, they were a force of nature. They didn't negotiate. They didn't wait for permission. They made it very clear that they would never allow the galaxy to fall to fear or tyranny again. But the story didn't end there. The human fleet didn't leave after the battle. Instead, they began to rebuild Kultani's defenses, giving the planet's inhabitants a sense of security they had never known before. They offered them more than just weapons, they offered them knowledge, advanced training, the tools to stand on their own 2 feet. For the first time in centuries, Kultanis didn't have to rely on anyone else for protection. They could stand tall, defend their own world, and even face down the occasional threat when it came their way. And when they asked the humans why they had gone to such lengths, the response was the same as it had been before. We don't leave people behind, ever. But the humans' intervention wasn't just about firepower. It wasn't just about flexing their military might or showing the galaxy who was in charge. It was about something more fundamental, something more powerful, a promise to defend the defenseless, a promise to ensure that no one would be left to suffer without a way to fight back. Humanity's arrival wasn't just a tactical victory, it was the beginning of a shift in how the galaxy would view power, trust, and responsibility. Across the galaxy, people began to look at humanity differently. They no longer saw them as just another species vying for influence among the stars. They saw them as the force that would stand with you when all seemed lost, the force that would help you rise again, even when the universe seemed intent on crushing you. And so, as the stories continued to spread, more and more worlds began reaching out. Some were in need of military assistance, others only wanted the technology and training to defend themselves. But one thing was clear, humanity's presence was becoming a symbol of hope. Wherever tyranny reigned, wherever desperation echoed through the stars, humanity's firepower followed. The galaxy would never be the same again. And for those who had once thought they were alone, those who had thought that their cries for help would always go unanswered, their new reality was one of safety, of strength, and above all, of a promise kept. We don't leave people behind, ever. And that, more than anything, was the firepower that changed everything. Desperate for help, they got firepower. The best HFY sci-fi stories continued. As the months passed, the galaxy began to shift. Humanity's reputation spread like a firestorm, igniting hope in the hearts of countless worlds that had once believed themselves helpless. Where once there had been whispers of humanity's arrival, there were now open requests for assistance. The galaxy, a vast and fractured place, began to coalesce around the one thing that had always stood the test of time: strength. The next call came from a distant system, one known as Lyris V. It had long been a place of peace, nestled within the fertile sectors of the galaxy, untouched by the constant turmoil and war that plagued the Outer Rim. The Lyrisians were a peaceful race, skilled in agriculture and diplomacy, but their paradise was shattered when the Illusion Collective, a brutal and power-hungry alliance of warlords, turned their sights on the fertile world. The Collective's forces were numerous, their ships vast, their reputation for conquest unrivaled. Lyris V had no military of its own, no defense strong enough to stop the incoming tide. The Lyrisians sent a desperate message. "We need help," their leaders pleaded. "Please, save us before we are lost." The message reached the human fleet within hours. Once again, the humans responded. A massive battle cruiser, the Sovereign Dawn, entered the Lyrisian system, cutting through the stars like a blade of justice. Accompanying it was a flotilla of smaller ships, each equipped with technology that the Illusion Collective had never seen. The humans didn't waste time negotiating. Their strategy was simple: defend, protect, destroy. The collective would be given no quarter. The warlords of the Illusion Collective underestimated humanity, as so many others had. They had seen species rise and fall, and they were sure that the Lyrisians' pleas for help were just the latest cry from the weak. When the humans arrived, the Illusions launched their full fleet against them, confident in their overwhelming numbers. But humanity didn't flinch. The Sovereign Dawn fired its pulse cannons, sending shockwaves through the void. The smaller ships coordinated seamlessly, their advanced weaponry tearing through the Illusion fleet. The Collective's warships, though massive and heavily armored, were no match for the speed and precision of the humans' attacks. The human fleet didn't just fight, they outclassed their enemies at every turn, targeting weak points with pinpoint accuracy, exploiting every advantage with brutal effectiveness. For hours, the battle raged. The Illusions fought fiercely, but they were not prepared for the ferocity of the human onslaught. One by one, their ships were disabled, their fleet scattered, and their morale shattered. The humans didn't stop until the last of the Collective's ships were forced into retreat, their once proud armada crippled and leaderless. When the smoke cleared, the Lyrisians were left standing, stunned and grateful. The Lyrisian Council, in awe of what they had witnessed, met with the human commanders to offer their thanks. "You've saved us," the Lyrisian leader said, her voice trembling. "But why? Why risk everything for a planet you barely know?" The human commander, a seasoned veteran named Captain Eric Ray, looked at her with unwavering resolve. "We don't leave people behind, ever." The message rang out once again. Humanity's intervention wasn't about political gain or strategic advantage, it was about something deeper, something rooted in the core of their identity. Humanity fought not just to win, but to protect, to stand against the tide of darkness that sought to sweep away those who could not defend themselves. The Lyrisians, like the Galterans before them, realized that humanity wasn't just a species with firepower, they were a species of resolve, a species that, no matter the cost, would never allow innocence to fall prey to the powerful and the cruel. But the story of Lyris V became something more. It became a turning point, the moment when the galaxy started to see humanity not as an isolated, self-interested species, but as the embodiment of a new kind of order, a force for justice that would stand against tyranny wherever it reared its ugly head. The request for help became a symbol in itself, a call that rang through the stars, and for those who had once believed that they were alone, that their cries would go unanswered, humanity had shown them a new reality. And then came the final test. A call from the frontier world of Nephra 3. The Nephrans were an ancient race, known for their wisdom and deep understanding of the cosmos, but their peaceful existence had been shattered by a galactic warlord who sought to enslave their people and harness their knowledge. The Nephrans had tried to defend themselves with diplomacy, but the warlord cared not for treaties or negotiations. He wanted the Nephrans' secrets, their technology, their very soul. And he was coming to take them. The Nephrans had no hope. Their ships were outdated, their defenses weak, but they knew one thing: they needed to call for help. And once again, the humans answered. This time, however, the situation was different. The warlord had gathered a fleet larger than any the humans had ever faced before, a force so massive it would have crushed most species under its weight. Yet humanity did not hesitate. They came not just with firepower, but with a strategy, an intricate, precise plan to overwhelm the enemy and break the chains before they could be forged. The battle that followed was unlike any before. The human fleet faced a wave of destruction the likes of which they had never seen. Yet they stood firm, each soldier, each ship, fighting with a singular purpose. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to ensure that the Nephrans would never fall under tyranny's shadow. In the end, the warlord's fleet was shattered, and his forces scattered. The Nephrans were free once again, thanks to the relentless will of humanity. The galaxy had been forever changed, and as the Nephron leaders stood before the human fleet, they realized something profound. Humanity had not just fought for them, they had fought for something greater, the future of all species, the promise that no one would ever stand alone in the face of darkness. We don't leave people behind, ever. And with that, the stars themselves seemed to echo humanity's oath. Desperate for help, they got firepower. The best HFY sci-fi stories continued. After the victory on Nephra 3, humanity's presence in the galaxy grew into something far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The message was clear, and it resonated with more than just the oppressed or the defenseless. It was a message of strength and unity that stirred something deep within the hearts of every species that had been touched by humanity's resolve. Where others might hesitate or make compromises, humanity's approach was simple and decisive: fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, and never let the darkness swallow the innocent. Soon after the battle on Nephra, the galaxy had changed. A new alliance began to take form, not of planets united for trade or power, but of species united for a common cause, one that transcended borders, cultures, and histories. Humanity became the beacon of hope in a galaxy filled with turmoil. But not all were pleased with the rise of this new order. A faction of the galaxy's most powerful warlords, known as the Sovereign Circle, saw the rise of humanity as a direct threat to their control. The power they had wielded for millennia was now under siege by a species that operated with brutal efficiency and unyielding compassion. The Sovereigns knew that if they didn't act soon, they would lose their grip on the galaxy's dark corners forever. And so, they made their move. The first strike came without warning. The Sovereign Circle unleashed a full-scale invasion on the human stronghold on the world of Argolis Prime. Argolis Prime had become the center of humanity's operations, a strategic base where their fleets were stationed, and their training programs flourished. It was a world that had become a symbol of humanity's strength, and the Sovereigns intended to destroy it. They attacked with overwhelming force, unleashing wave after wave of heavily armed ships. The Sovereign fleets were massive, far larger than anything humanity had ever faced. They had anticipated that the humans would fall back, that they would run and hide behind their walls or retreat to their far-flung colonies. But what the Sovereigns didn't understand was the nature of humanity's resolve. When the Sovereign fleet entered the Argolis system, they were met by an unexpected force, a full human battle group that stood its ground without hesitation. "We don't run," Commander Alara Chase, the leader of the human forces on Argolis Prime, broadcasted as the first shots rang out. "We stand and fight." The battle was brutal, a clash of titanic forces. The Sovereigns, confident in their overwhelming numbers, had underestimated the human ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. The human fleets were not just skilled, they were relentless, using tactics that were unexpected, unconventional, and devastatingly effective. Every ship that fell, every battle lost, only seemed to fuel humanity's determination. With each wave, the human forces adapted, outmaneuvering and counterattacking with precision. The fight was not one of brute strength alone, but one of strategy, of using every ounce of technology and ingenuity to defeat an enemy that far outnumbered them. In the heat of battle, the humans deployed their newest weapon, a prototype starship known as the Iron Vanguard. With its state-of-the-art energy shields, hyper-efficient reactors, and advanced weapons systems, it became a harbinger of doom for the Sovereign fleet. The ship's weapons tore through the Sovereign ships like paper, its agility leaving their slow, lumbering warships helpless. It wasn't long before the tides began to turn. One by one, the Sovereign warlords began to retreat. Their once unified fleet began to break apart under the human onslaught. The humans, relentless in their pursuit, didn't allow a single warlord to escape unscathed. As the Sovereign Circle's fleet disintegrated, the remaining forces were forced to withdraw, humiliated and broken. Argolis Prime had been defended, but the price was steep. The human forces had suffered significant losses, and the planet's surface bore the scars of battle. But as the dust settled, Commander Chase's voice echoed across the calms once more. "This victory is not ours alone. It is the victory of every planet, every species that has ever stood against tyranny. It is the victory of hope." Humanity had not only defeated an overwhelming foe, it had struck a blow for the freedom of the galaxy, reminding every species, every corner of the universe, of the power of unity and resolve. And so, the story of humanity's intervention spread even further. The Sovereign Circle, once a powerful force in the galaxy, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. The galaxy, once divided and broken, began to come together, slowly but surely, around the human-led alliance. As more and more species reached out to join this new order, the strength of humanity's influence grew. The galaxy that had once known only fear, betrayal, and darkness now found itself standing on the brink of something new, a future where, perhaps, no species would ever again be left behind. Humanity's promise became more than just a slogan. It became a universal truth that echoed throughout the stars: we don't leave people behind, ever. And as the galaxy began to heal, as the wounds of war were slowly mended, one thing remained certain: humanity had forged a legacy that would echo across the stars for millennia to come. A legacy not of destruction, but of hope, of courage, and above all, of unyielding determination to protect and defend those who could not defend themselves. For in a universe that often seemed indifferent to the struggles of the weak, humanity had shown that even the smallest voice could spark a revolution, and that no force, no matter how vast, could ever extinguish the light of those who chose to stand and fight. Desperate for help, they got firepower. The best HFY sci-fi stories continued. After the decisive victory at Argolis Prime, humanity's name became synonymous with justice, strength, and unwavering resolve. The Sovereign Circle had fallen, their power shattered by the unified might of the human-led alliance. But the galaxy was still a vast, turbulent place, and though the fires of war had dimmed, the darkness had not fully receded. Not long after the Battle of Argolis Prime, another message arrived, this one from the remote mining planet of Vasher 4. The inhabitants of Vasher 4 were a hardy people, renowned for their skill in resource extraction and metallurgy. However, they were also infamous for their neutrality, staying out of the larger galactic conflicts, preferring to remain independent from any superpower. Vasher 4 had always maintained a delicate balance, but now that balance was being shattered by a new threat: a sect of spacefaring zealots calling themselves the Eclipsed Order. The Eclipsed Order was a fanatical faction, convinced that the galaxy's progress was an affront to the divine order they worshipped. They sought to purge entire planets of technology, reducing them to primitive states in their warped vision of enlightenment. Vasher 4 had been marked as their next target, with the zealots already beginning to cut off the planet's trade routes and launching raids on its mining colonies. The Vasherans, though resilient, were overwhelmed by the fanatical zealots. They had no standing military, and their weapons were outdated, ill-suited to defend against the technological onslaught of the Order's forces. With their resources dwindling and their once thriving economy collapsing, the Vasherans sent a final, desperate cry for help. And once again, humanity responded. Within days, the human fleet was en route, cutting through space at lightning speed. This time, however, there was something different in the air. The humans were not just coming to aid a helpless species, they were coming to wipe out a threat that had the potential to ravage countless worlds. The Eclipsed Order, with their zealot-driven crusade, had to be stopped. Commander Ilara Chase, fresh off her victory at Argolis Prime, was given command of the operation. She was joined by several human generals, strategists, and engineers, each of them seasoned by the recent conflicts, their resolve sharpened like the edge of a blade. The human fleet, now even more advanced and battle-hardened, was ready to strike. As they entered the Vasher system, they found the Eclipsed Order's fleet in orbit, its massive ships hovering ominously over the planet's surface. The Zealots, however, had underestimated humanity's approach once again. The humans did not simply rush into combat, they analyzed, they adapted, and they waited for the perfect moment to strike. The battle that unfolded in the skies over Vasher 4 was a masterpiece of tactical brilliance. The humans used decoy ships, feigned retreats, and confusing maneuvers to divide the zealot forces. The Eclipsed Order, arrogant in their belief that they would cleanse the planet of its corruption, fell into humanity's trap. The zealot fleet was broken apart, piece by piece, with surgical precision. Yet the humans did not stop there. They deployed their ground forces with equal efficiency. The zealots, entrenched in fortified positions across the planet's surface, were caught off guard by humanity's relentless assault. Each human soldier was a force unto themselves, trained to adapt to any environment and face any foe. The Eclipsed Order's fanatics, though fierce in their convictions, were no match for the superior technology and tactics of the human soldiers. Within hours, the Zealots were defeated, their leadership was captured, their forces routed, and the planet of Vasher 4 was liberated. The Vasherans, stunned by the overwhelming firepower and precision of their rescuers, watched as the human forces dismantled the Zealot strongholds and restored order to their world. As Commander Chase addressed the people of Vasher 4, she delivered the same words that had become a mantra across the galaxy. "We don't leave people behind, ever." But the message, this time, was different. It wasn't just about military might or victory, it was about the future. Humanity wasn't just defending planets. They were rebuilding worlds, protecting cultures, and ensuring that even the smallest spark of resistance would never be extinguished. "Your freedom is your right," Commander Chase continued, her voice resolute, "and as long as we breathe, we will defend that right, not just for you, but for every world, every species that believes in the promise of a galaxy where no one is left to suffer in silence." The Vasherans, who had once been isolated and self-reliant, now understood the true nature of the alliance they had joined. They were no longer a solitary world on the fringe of galactic affairs. They were part of something greater, a galaxy united under the banner of those who would not abandon the weak and the defenseless. And so, the Galactic Alliance continued to grow, its influence spreading as more and more worlds sought humanity's protection and guidance. Humanity had proven time and again that they would not leave anyone behind, not when there was a chance to fight, to defend, to protect. But even as peace began to settle across the galaxy, there were whispers in the darkness. The Sovereign Circle had fallen, but their remnants still lingered. Rogue factions, warlords, and rogue AIs who sought to seize control of the galaxy continued to operate in the shadows, biding their time. And humanity, ever vigilant, knew that they would be ready. For they had learned something fundamental: peace was not a given, and strength was not enough. It was the will to protect, to stand for those who could not protect themselves, that would ensure the survival of the galaxy. The message remained the same, echoing across the stars. "We don't leave people behind, ever." The firepower, the strategy, the resolve, these were the weapons that would keep the galaxy free. And as long as humanity existed, no darkness would go unchallenged, no cry for help would ever be unanswered. The galaxy had found its protectors, and the light of humanity's firepower would continue to shine bright. Desperate for help, they got firepower. The best HFY sci-fi stories continued. As the years passed, the human-led alliance continued to grow stronger. Planets once isolated by war, strife, and despair were now unified under the banner of justice, with humanity standing as the unshakable pillar that held it all together. Worlds flourished, trade routes opened, and the flames of tyranny were extinguished wherever they appeared. But while the galaxy had found a semblance of peace, there was still a lurking shadow, a force that no one could quite place. Humanity's influence had spread far, and the species had earned a reputation that made even the most powerful factions think twice. Yet, the galaxy is vast, and not all threats are as easily vanquished as the Zealots of the Eclipsed Order. And on the fringes of known space, a dark force was growing, a force that would test humanity's resolve like never before. The call for help came from a system long thought abandoned, the Tiburon Expanse. This once thriving star system had fallen silent for decades after a cataclysmic war had ravaged it. Entire fleets had disappeared into the dense nebulae of the expanse, their final fates unknown. It had been a place the galaxy avoided, a zone of instability where the boundaries between space and time itself were bent by strange cosmic anomalies. But then, suddenly, a distress signal emerged from the heart of the expanse, faint at first, like the dying echo of a lost voice. It was an ancient message, barely comprehensible, but it was clear: the Tiburon Expanse was not abandoned. Something, or someone, was still there. The human fleet, ever watchful, received the message, and once again, humanity answered. Admiral Kale Voss, one of humanity's most skilled tacticians, led the mission. He knew the dangers of the expanse better than most, having studied it during his rise through the ranks. Few ships had ever returned from the Tiburon system, and the few that did spoke of strange anomalies, ships trapped in spacetime loops, Entire fleets consumed by the expanse's gravitational distortions. And most chilling of all, whispers of a terrible, unknown enemy. A force that had been growing in the darkness of the system for centuries. When the human fleet arrived, they were greeted by an unsettling silence. The expanse was vast, stretching over 1,000 light-years, with nebulae that made it almost impossible to scan or navigate through. Yet, humanity had a secret weapon, their adaptability and their ingenuity. They deployed specialized ships, built to withstand the unpredictable anomalies and gravitational disturbances that plagued the expanse. But the further they ventured into the system, the more they felt the oppressive weight of the unknown. The sensors aboard their ships began to malfunction, and communications became distorted. The human fleet pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the distress signal. Then, it happened. Without warning, a massive fleet of ships emerged from the heart of the expanse, warships unlike anything humanity had ever seen. These ships were ancient, covered in strange symbols, and their energy signatures were unlike any known to science. They were built from a material that seemed to warp and shimmer, and their hulls were reinforced with an unknown alloy that absorbed energy. These were no mere raiders or pirates. The enemy was a civilization far older than humanity, one that had been lost to time. The Tiburon expanse had been the birthplace of a race known as the Archon, the ancient and forgotten rulers of a long-dead empire. They had vanished eons ago, their civilization consumed by their own technological overreach. But now, from the heart of the expanse, they had returned, and they sought to reclaim what they had once lost. The Archon were more than just a powerful enemy, they were a species driven by an almost religious obsession with domination, bound by a singular belief that the galaxy must be cleansed and reshaped in their image. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Powered by exotic energy sources that bent the very laws of physics, they sought to re-establish their empire, and humanity was in their way. The human fleet stood ready, but this enemy was unlike any they had faced before. Their weapons could rip through shields, their ships could slip in and out of space-time, and their warriors were fearsome, clad in armor that seemed to shimmer with dark energy. But humanity had faced impossible odds before. Admiral Voss made a bold decision. Rather than engage in traditional combat, they would force the Archon into the one thing they had not prepared for, unpredictability. Humanity's greatest strength was their ability to adapt, to use their intellect and creativity to turn the tide of battle in their favor. With a series of feints, misdirections, and diversionary tactics, the human fleet slowly lured the Archon forces into a trap. Using their knowledge of the expanse's gravitational anomalies, they created false signals that led the Archon fleet into a dangerous region of space, a region where the fabric of time itself twisted and turned in unpredictable ways. The Archon fleet, driven by their obsessive need for control, followed without hesitation. As the Archon ships ventured deeper into the expanse's heart, they found themselves trapped in an endless loop, caught in the gravitational pull of an unstable anomaly. It was a place where time and space bled together, and nothing could escape its grasp. But humanity was not content to merely trap their enemies. They wanted to ensure the Archon would never return to threaten the galaxy again. With precision, they unleashed the full might of their weaponry. The Archon ships, unable to break free from the anomaly, were slowly disintegrated, their once proud fleets torn apart by the very forces they had once controlled. In the aftermath, the human fleet emerged victorious, but it was clear that the Tiburon expanse was not a place of peace. The Archon had been destroyed, their empire erased, but the galaxy now understood that there were still ancient forces lurking in the dark corners of the universe, waiting to reawaken. As the last of the Archon vessels vanished into the swirling chaos of the expanse, Admiral Voss sent out a final message to the galaxy. "We don't leave people behind, ever. And when ancient shadows rise from the depths, we will stand ready." The message was heard across every corner of the galaxy. Humanity had once again proven that no matter how great the enemy, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against them, they would fight relentlessly and without hesitation. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but as long as humanity remained, there was hope. And with that hope, the stars shone just a little brighter.